Hello everyone. We are going to be discussing Chapter 15.3, Controlling Air Pollution. Our guiding question is, what measures can limit and prevent pollution of the atmosphere? By the end of the lecture, you should be able to explain how the provisions of the Clean Air Act have reduced air pollution in the United States, and you should be able to describe international efforts to reduce the ozone hole. Go ahead and take a few minutes, pause the video if you need, to document the definitions for each of the following terms in your workbook. Lesson 15.3, Controlling Air Pollution. Since the Clean Air Act was first enacted in 1963, emissions of the worst pollutants in the U.S. have been decreased by 57%. We're going to talk more about the Clean Air Act in a moment, but first I'm going to tell you about a Native American Indian tribe, the Southern Utes. They live in southwestern Colorado, within sight of the La Plata Mountains. Besides being beautiful, this area is also rich in natural gas. The removal and processing of this fuel provide income and work for the people in the tribe and the surrounding communities. However, faulty processing of natural gas can pollute the air. The Southern Utes want to keep the air clean and safe to breathe. To do that, leaders of the tribe have worked with the state and federal governments to develop an air quality program. The program currently involves monitoring the air for pollutants and identifying point and non-point sources of air pollutants on the Southern Utes Reservation. In addition, the program conducts inspections of industries and sees to it that industries fix any problems that arise. The Southern Ute Air Quality Program also includes many other activities, such as research into methods of eliminating air pollution. The Southern Utes are using technology, cooperation, creativity, and determination to preserve air quality. The Southern Ute Air Quality Program focuses on a relatively small area of land. At the national and global level, the United States and other nations are taking steps to deal with air pollution. We have a long way to go, but many of our efforts have been successful. We're going to continue on reading about some of them. The Clean Air Act. In addition, to address air pollution in the United States, Congress has passed a series of laws, including the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act was first passed in 1963 and has been revised several times since. Revisions in 1970 and 1990 were especially important. Those revisions set stricter standards for air quality and strengthened the government's ability to enforce regulations. Goal of the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act protects and improves the quality of air in order to safeguard human health and the environment. The law takes measures to reduce the emissions of pollutants that cause health problems such as asthma and cancer. It also limits the release of pollutants responsible for environmental problems such as smog and acid deposition. What are some provisions of the Clean Air Act? Well, the Clean Air Act limits emissions of pollutants by motor vehicles and industries. It sets standards for air quality. The law limits the concentration of some specific air pollutants, such as carbon monoxide and particulate matter. The upper limit of each pollutant is based on the maximum amount that a human can tolerate without harm. It also lets people sue industries that break these rules. And lastly, it sets aside funds for research into pollution control. Under the Clean Air Act, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, sets nationwide standards governing air pollution and air quality. However, the states and Native American tribes have the option of developing and enforcing specific regulations that are equivalent to or exceed, meaning they are stricter than, those found in the Clean Air Act. Major accomplishments of the Clean Air Act is the reduction in air pollutants. Since the Clean Air Act, the release of the worst air pollutants has gone down by 57%. This decrease in pollution has happened even though there are now many more people in the United States and we use much more energy. The reduction of outdoor air pollution is one of the nation's greatest accomplishments in protecting the environment. First, motor vehicles. Cars and trucks are now cause less pollution. Catalytic converters have helped bring this about. A catalytic converter is a device in the motor vehicle that reduces the amount of air pollutants in emissions. It changes harmful emissions such as carbon monoxide into substances that are less harmful such as carbon dioxide and water. Catalytic converters are usually located between the engine and the muffler of a car. Since 1975, all new cars in the United States are required to have a catalytic converter. We also have cleaner gasoline. Gasoline once contained lead, and lead was part of the emissions from the exhaust system of motor vehicles. Lead from vehicle emissions can settle into the ground and contaminate it. If lead gets into the bloodstream of a person, especially a young child, it can cause problems ranging from behavioral disorders to complete devastating effects like mental retardation. The EPA has been working to phase out lead in gasoline ever since 1973. Today, gasoline used by cars and trucks contains almost no lead. Lastly, industries and power plants. As a result of the Clean Air Act, industries and power plants have been required to reduce the amount of pollutants they release. Scrubbers are responsible for much of this reduction. A scrubber removes pollutants or changes them chemically before they leave the factory smokestacks. Let's take a look at the scrubber. This is a depiction of a scrubber used by industries and power plants to clean polluted air before it is released into the atmosphere. First, we can see that air travels into the scrubber. Number two, the dirty air passes through clean water droplets. 3, the water droplets are able to capture the pollutants and carry them to the bottom of the scrubber. 4, clean air is able to be released and leave. And 5, water and the pollutants that it captured exit and can be disposed of safely. Now that we know how we are reducing air pollutants, let's take a look at the ozone. The ozone is a bit of a success story. Ozone is a pollutant in smog in the troposphere. However, recall that ozone is highly beneficial in the ozone layer of the lower stratosphere. Here, ozone absorbs ultraviolet radiation from the sun. UV radiation can harm living things. For example, it can cause skin cancer in humans by chemically changing the genetic material within the skin cells. The ozone hole. Late in the 20th century, scientists noticed that measurements of the ozone in the stratosphere were lower than they should have been. By 1985, the level of ozone over Antarctica was 40 to 60% lower than it had been 10 years before. People began to use the term ozone hole for the area of lowered ozone concentration over Antarctica that occurs every year from August until October. Chlorofluorocarbons. Earlier in 1974, two scientists, Sherwood Rowland and Mario Molina, had predicted ozone depletion or loss and had identified the probable cause. Rowland and Molina suggested that chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons could cause ozone depletion. Chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, are a family of chemical compounds containing chlorine, fluorine, and carbon. In the 1970s and 1980s, CFCs were manufactured in large amounts. They were used in many ways, for example, in refrigerators and in aerosol spray cans. Molina and Rowland were correct in their prediction. CFCs were rising into the stratosphere and then releasing chlorine atoms that react with ozone. The chemical reactions destroy ozone molecules in the stratosphere. This destruction accounts for the ozone hole over Antarctica. The Montreal Protocol. Recovering of the ozone layer. Scientists and other people became concerned about possible effects of ozone depletion. They were afraid, for example, that cases of skin cancer would increase. As a result of this concern, many nations, including the United States, began to work together to restrict production of CFCs and other ozone-depleting substances. In 1987, many nations signed the Montreal Protocol. This was a treaty strengthened by later amendments which called for major cuts in CFC manufacturing. Today, the production and use of ozone-depleting compounds has fallen by 95% since the late 1980s. Industry was able to shift to different chemicals to perform similar functions. The new chemicals have largely turned out to be cheaper and more efficient. Evidence indicates that the ozone layer is beginning to recover. In the last few years, concentrations of stratospheric ozone have stabilized, and scientists expect that they will soon begin to increase to their former levels. The Montreal Protocol is widely considered the biggest success story in addressing a global environmental problem. The Montreal Protocol is a model for international cooperation in dealing with other worldwide environmental problems, such as climate change. Please go ahead and answer questions 7 through 11 in your student workbook. Reviewing key concepts. First, the Clean Air Act has provisions that have reduced air pollution in the United States. And nations have taken steps to deal with the problem of ozone loss in the stratosphere. Please make sure to complete your workbook for classwork participation points, and I'll see you in the next lecture.